Women's health needs innovation and creativity. It needs everybody to look at it in a new way.
There is a difference in the biology.
There is just this massive data gap when it comes to the female body.
It's not a women's health problem, it's a problem.
The immune responses are very, very different. In response to a pathogen threat, a male immune system will launch the Army. The female immune system will launch the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines.
This past June, WHAM hosted a celebration in D.C. for the 30th anniversary of the Revitalization Act of 1993.
30 years since women and people of color were finally included in NIH clinical trials.
I think it's time we do something. An anniversary should re-energize with a purpose.
3, not 30. We don't want to have to wait 30 more years for many great things to happen.
Women's health research isn't just good science, it's a good investment.
We need to affect long-term change. We just can't invest blindly.
I'm going to be signing the presidential memorandum to establish the first ever White House initiative on women's health research.
Thank you, WHAM.
It's up to us, all women, to create the changes that we set forth today so that women and society flourish.
We can do this in 3 years. Let's not wait 30.
Good afternoon. I'm Carolee Lee, founder and CEO of WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters. And on behalf of WHAM and our partners at Bright Focus Foundation, KPMG, and Northwell Health's Katz's Institute for Women's Health, thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a powerful and engaging conversation with some of the foremost leaders in women's brain health. We're here to discuss a promising and transformative topic, unlocking the future of brain health, with a focus on women who represent 2/3 of the population with Alzheimer's and are 2 times as likely to be affected by this disease. Brain health doesn't stop at the neck. It's central to every aspect of our well-being. Yet it's an area where women face disproportionate risks and too many unanswered questions. Consider this: women make up 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients, as I said, and suffer from depression twice as likely as well. These statistics call for action, and today we'll explore the incredible opportunities to bridge gaps in funding, research, and innovation, opportunities that promise better outcomes for everyone. This roundtable is part of WHAM's 3 Not 30 initiative, which challenges leaders to achieve in 3 years what traditionally has taken us decades to make happen. Together, we can dive into cutting-edge advancements from AI-driven diagnostics to the transformative potential of sex-specific research and explore the immense economic and societal returns of prioritizing women's brain health. I'm excited to be joined by such remarkable panelists, true leaders who are shaping the future of brain health. And today's discussion should uncover actionable strategies, groundbreaking innovations, and high-impact investment opportunities that are refining and redefining brain health research and care. Our discussion will be moderated by none other than my dear friend Meryl Comer, a trusted vice chair of WHAM and an extraordinary leading Alzheimer's advocate, voice, journalist, and New York Times bestselling author. She's co-founder of Us Against Alzheimer's, a founding member of the Global Brain Health BHP Brain Trust in Switzerland, and at which I had the pleasure of presenting just last month. So let's dive in and uncover how we can work together to shape a brighter, healthier future for all of us. And thank you for being here. Meryl, it's up to you.
Thank you, Carolee. It's with good reason that Carolee was named to the 2024 Times 100 Health. Not only is WHAM's success driven by data and its 3 Not 30 mantra on the issue of sex and gender research top of mind, but for the advocacy, it coincides with a promising inflection point across the brain health landscape with targeted early-stage therapies, lifestyle prevention strategies, and a convergence of promising innovations in early diagnostics. Our charge today to unlock the future of brain health. Now, future generational health depends on it, as does clarity of the message. And to that point, here's how we linked WHAM's data with a video excerpt to enlighten and control international skeptics at Lausanne's 11's workshop in collaboration with the Global BHP Brain Trust. Let's take a look.
Here's a list of things we know more about than the female brain. The ocean floor. Male pattern baldness. Dinos. Erectile dysfunction. How to make erectile dysfunction medicine chewable and yummy. Artificial sheep uteruses. LeBron James's off-season diet. Outer space. Outer space. Meaning if men really were from Mars and women were actually from Venus, we might know more about menopause by now. Even in cases like Alzheimer's, which mostly affects women, preclinical research relies on male models. The assumption is if it works for men, it works. And that doesn't work. The most recently approved Alzheimer's drug shows positive effects primarily in men. One size fits all is actually one size fits half. And in this case, it's the wrong half. When 99.5% of all neuroscience research excludes matters of women's health, mysterious things stay that way.
Why do women get Alzheimer's more often than men?
Is my birth control making me depressed?
Are concussions different in girls?
Why can't I remember anyone's name anymore? Why am I so sleepy, sad, hungry? Am I under-caffeinated, or is this a menopause thing?
Jury is still out because nobody bothered to put any women on the jury. The male body has been the standard since always. Lab rats, male. Clinical test subjects, men. The tenured neuroscience faculty, 80% tweed elbow patches. But what if, maybe, what if we set fire to the status quo? Demand better, broader data. Study women. Thousands of them. We start a revolution in neuroscience. Or join those who already have.
That video brought the WHO to the table, and it was generously shared by our first panelist, Dr. Emily Jacobs, director of the Ann S. Bowers Women's Brain Health Initiative. She's an associate professor at UC Santa Barbara. Emily, thank you for joining us. When I asked permission, your comment back to me was, let's make it viral. This is not about a moment. It's about a movement. Let's welcome Dr. Emily Jacobs. Emily?
Hi, everybody. First and foremost, thank you to WHAM leadership, Carol Lee and Meryl and everybody here for hosting and really launching this dialogue. This is, as Meryl said, I think women's health is having a moment. Many of us were at the White House to witness this historic act, but that it can't be sort of a flash in a pan. We have to take this energy and really drive change and accelerate the pace of change. And I think that's why we're all here. So I want to just begin by telling you a little bit about what we're doing in our corner over at the University of California to help drive change. I think it's clear to most people on this call that prioritizing women's health research is going to require a global shift in science culture. And that shift starts now, right? It starts with all of us using the tools and the talent and the resources that we have to push for change. So the Women's Brain Health Initiative is a newly endowed research institute. We're headquartered at UC Santa Barbara. We span 6 UC campuses, including Stanford and Cornell. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. And so sort of to paint this picture, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I use brain imaging technology. And neuroscientists have had MRI since the early 90s. And this is an incredible tool, right? It gives us access to the human brain in a way that we've never had before. We can understand how it works when it's healthy or what goes wrong when it's not. But since the early 1990s to present day, there's been, give or take, about 50,000 MRI studies that have been published on the human brain to drive advances in therapeutic treatments and just our basic understanding of brain function, right? 50,000. Now, of those 50,000 articles, less than half of 1% are on female-specific experiences, right? So that's where in the video, if you watch the whole thing, you can get some of those statistics. Less than half of 1% of all of brain imaging articles. That's everything we know about how the brain responds to pregnancy, menopause, menopausal hormone therapy, birth control, all of that. Is sort of infinitesimally small. And that realization led us to create the Women's Brain Health Initiative And we are driven by this realization that neuroscience is going to flourish if we take the health of men and women seriously. And so we're doing that through big data. I think you've seen over the last 10 years some really rigorous, excellent science come out trying to understand things like how the brain changes across menopause or what happens to the brain before and after pregnancy. But a lot of that research is siloed. And certainly at the University of California, we have 10 campuses, but the research that's being generated might go to produce a small scale study. And then that data, that MRI data, stay disconnected. So the insight that we had at the Women's Brain Health Initiative is to create a infrastructure for pooling data, just like particle physics and genomics did before us, right? Their insight was that by pooling data on a global scale, we can start to drive discovery in ways that have never been done before, especially if you power that big data with the latest breakthroughs in AI. So you can really sort of exploit that power of big data. And at the University of California, we can do that because we're one university system. We have 10 campuses. 8 of those have research dedicated magnets. And so what we've spent, we had our public launch in just a year ago today. And what we've spent the last year doing is really kind of building this infrastructure. So data, MRI data and women's health data can be paired together, pooled, and then put on a platform called Open Neuro so that the global science community can access the data and make discoveries. In addition to that, we have 2 big moonshot projects where we hone in on specific life transitions to understand how the human brain changes across pregnancy. We had a flagship paper that came out a couple weeks ago using something called precision neuroimaging so that we can track the brain in really exquisite, unprecedented detail to understand how this metamorphosis is changing across pregnancy. And we want to do the same for menopause. So I'll just pause there, but the WBHI is so thrilled to join forces with WHAM and the conversation that they have really led since the beginning by leveraging the power of the entire University of California system to really evoke change for women's health.
Thank you, Emily. And that energy, that was a 6-year journey, not just overnight. So we're going to circle back with Emily a little later. Joining us now is Dr. Sharon Rossi, Director of Neuroscience Programs at Bright Focus Foundation, where Cure in Mind is Cure in Sight. Sharon, please join us. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Meryl. It's so great to be here on this panel with such amazing colleagues and female researchers whose work and passion for their work I just really truly admire. And I'm also excited to share how Bright Focus Foundation has been supporting women researchers and funding research on the health of women over decades. So since our inception over 50 years ago, Bright Focus has awarded more than $300 million in research funding, and we now focus on 3 age-related neurodegenerative diseases that disproportionately affect women. So we fund research on Alzheimer's disease, macular degeneration, and glaucoma. We encourage cross-disease research and want to find and leverage common mechanisms across diseases and use multidisciplinary techniques to devise new therapeutics that could potentially be used across different neurodegenerative diseases. And we also, as Meryl pointed out, value the potential of the eye as an extension of the brain to inform us or provide a window of some of the degenerative processes that may be going on in the brain. So in our time, we have funded thousands of scientists across the globe. We focus on early career investigators because we understand that this fresh, innovative perspective is going to be absolutely essential to tackle these centuries-old diseases that still don't have satisfactory treatments or cures. In 2024, we had our most diverse research portfolio to date, and 2/3 of our awardees were female researchers. And this is really important because we're able to support them and mentor them through some of the earliest stages of their careers, where these positive experiences are really important in keeping women in science and moving them up in academia so they can start shaping these important initiatives and have a seat at the table. Bright Focus has been funding sex-based research for decades, since the early 90s. We're proud to say we've invested over $5 million specifically looking at mechanistic differences across sexes in our 3 diseases. But when we're talking about sex-based difference research, I think it's important to just point out that it's really just good research. It's good science. If there are differences that exist between populations, it's absolutely essential that we harness those differences, and they can tell us something about how these differences underlie physiology and then ultimately, disease. And so I think that we really need to leverage some of these low-hanging fruits or opportunities that we know these differences exist. So for instance, menopause, as Emily pointed out, 100% of women will undergo menopause. And we know that menopause is associated with cognitive decline. This is associated with drops in estrogen. Menopause is also a risk factor for glaucoma, macular degeneration, and a whole host of other bodily systems declining after menopause. And so to me, this actually looks like more of an enhanced aging effect and a common mechanism across all of disease systems, bodily systems, where menopause is actually enhancing aging and driving disease. And so if we can start disentangling the mechanisms by which menopause is driving these diseases, then we could potentially treat multiple diseases at the same time. Recent findings from Bright Focus have actually shown that menopause increases inflammation in the brain. But not only that, but it also causes a decrease in white matter integrity. And I think this is really important because, as Emily has shown in her work during pregnancy, white matter is very dynamic. It changes, and it seems to have more positive effects in pregnancy, where these white matter connections get stronger and strengthened after pregnancy. However, in Alzheimer's disease and with aging, these white matter connections start to decline. And this is really important because the white matter facilitates communication between and across networks in the brain. And you can imagine if this starts to become dysfunctional, you will experience cognitive decline. So for me, this is one area where research can really hone in not only on sex-specific differences, because we know that myelin is different between males and females. We know that myelin is dynamic. It changes as we experience life, as we learn, as we recall memories. So we can kind of harness this plasticity of myelin and use it as a therapeutic target. So I think that's one area that we can really move into to identify novel biomarkers and sex-specific differences in Alzheimer's disease. Also, inflammation. We know inflammation is drastically different between males and females. We know that the inflammatory system in the periphery can interact with the brain and affect cells and processes in the brain. And we have funded a lot of work in this area. And some really recent exciting research that's come out of this has shown that females who have the ApoE4 risk gene, which is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, it's more prevalent in women, it's more deleterious in women. But these women who carry this risk factor are actually predisposed to Alzheimer's disease because they have this hyperimmunity, this hyperinflammation in their immune system. And as those immune cells infiltrate and migrate up to the brain, it prevents the brain cells from clearing toxic proteins like amyloid and tau. And what's really interesting is that this inflammatory signature marks the conversion from normal cognition to mild cognitive impairment. So imagine if we can inhibit this inflammatory molecule, then we can possibly stop this conversion to mild cognitive impairment that we see in these women that are susceptible. And even more interestingly, the same inflammatory molecule has been implicated in macular degeneration. So once again, we're pointing to common mechanisms of neurodegeneration, possibly common treatments, and then the potential of the eye to be an indicator for changes in the brain. So we're really excited about some of this upcoming work and disentangling some of these findings.
Thank you, Sharon. I have to say that the reason that menopause has become of specific interest is that in Alzheimer's, the disease begins 20 years before first symptoms. So you have that age range and it puts it in a sweet spot, which in fact is menopause. Joining us now is Dr. Catherine Bornbaum, Chief Business Officer of ReadySpec. Catherine is a self-proclaimed recovering academic. I've asked her to share her background and professional journey at ReadySpec that is leveraging AI to transform Alzheimer's diagnostics, with a shout out to your participation in Startup Health's Alzheimer's Moonshot. Catherine?
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here, especially with such incredible women leaders in this field. I feel very humbled, that's for sure. So I, as Meryl mentioned, am a recovering academic. I did start my career as an academic and scientist, and then worked in a number of sort of hospital, government health settings before returning back to academia. And then pivoting into industry, actually, after working with large data sets to inform health decision-making and health economics and things of this nature. I really became frustrated personally with the pace at which I could operate and the scale at which I could have an impact. And so this is when I met up with the co-founders of ReadySpec, Eliav and Roy, who were essentially working to transform the early detection of Alzheimer's disease using a combination of non-invasive retinal imaging and AI. And so this was really, really interesting to me, especially given my deep interest in neuro. And so essentially what we're doing here at ReadySpec is leveraging the connection between the eye and the brain that Sharon mentioned previously. So the back of the eye, or the retina, is actually embryologically a nervous tissue. And so this provides a really wonderful opportunity for us to have a proxy understanding of what may be happening in the brain just by measuring what's actually happening in the eye. And so at ReadySpec, we leverage this opportunity by taking images of the back of the eye with commonly available retinal cameras, but we do something a little bit unique to them. So we replace one of the sensors that exists in these cameras that are available at virtually every eye doctor's office around the world. And we replace the sensor to capture more wavelengths of color. So a standard sensor has 3 colors, red, green, and blue. And these are the same colors that the rods and cones in our eyes can actually detect and make sense of. So we take out the 3 wavelengths and we replace them with 100 or more than 100 wavelengths. And so this extra information allows us to detect spectral changes that might be happening in somebody who is at the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and differentiate them from somebody who is not experiencing those same changes. The experience to the person is just the same as if you go to the eye doctor's office. Now, how we're actually able to leverage this information is through deep learning or AI models that you've heard my wonderful colleagues reference already. So because our brains can't actually see this information because they just don't possess the biology required, we use AI to detect the patterns that exist in those folks who do have the early signs of Alzheimer's disease versus those who don't. So it's really quite incredible. And when we think about the power of AI and the information that's available in the eye, we know that there is so much more information that we've barely tapped into when it comes to sex-based differences. So just to give you a specific example, we know that there was this groundbreaking study that was completed by the folks at Google, where they used AI models to analyze almost 300,000 retinal images. And they were able to accurately detect a patient's sex with almost 100% accuracy. It was unbelievable just from the images that are available through the back of the eye. What this tells us is that there's really important sex-specific information that lies biologically just in our eyes, and we can, through companies like ReadySpec and technologies like ours, the AI can actually incorporate this information when we're training these models, as long as the data are well characterized, and so that we train the models to understand whose sex would be female versus male. And so when we think about how women are disproportionately affected by this disease, we understand that it's really, really critical to have diagnostic technologies, both new and emerging, that do consider these sex-specific factors. And so by training our AI models on sex-specific data, we now have the opportunity to create these tools that can identify risk earlier and with greater precision, and to specifically find these things that are unique to women's experiences, because we really need to make sure that when we're identifying folks early, that we're doing it with deep precision. It's not just about the idea of having better diagnostics, but about being able to empower prevention, personalization, and action.
Thank you, Catherine. I want to invite everyone back, our panelists back. Carol Lee will also be joining us. We are monitoring the chat, looking for your questions. We have a big audience, and we will try to be as responsive as possible. So let's bring all our panelists back and continue this dialogue, and we'll have them join us. I'd like to actually follow up a bit with Catherine as we're moving everyone back. Catherine, discuss the opportunity in translating the academic research to commercialization, because you're right at that cusp.
Yeah, so I think, especially having been an academic for many years, I think there is such an untapped opportunity to translate the innovations that are happening in academic settings to the broader marketplace or to industry. For instance, ReadySpec's technology is based off of technology that was invented at the University of Minnesota by Robert Vince and Swati More, who are medicinal chemists. So they were actually they were developing therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease. And they needed a way to figure out if it worked in the preclinical stage before folks have symptomology or even, mice and things like that. And so they actually invented the hyperspectral retinal imaging in order to see if the therapeutics were working. And so by working with their technology licensing office at the university, they were able to secure some intellectual property around this and also to make it visible to companies like ReadySpec that this was an opportunity. So they posted this on the website. And the academics worked closely with the technology transfer office to make sure that they were in the loop about the process. And then ReadySpec has since taken it and continued to commercialize the technology and to bring it to market. And I think, especially when I was early in my academic career, I didn't realize that this was even an option, that you can work with your university's tech transfer office to let them know what you are working on, what grants you're applying for, what new innovations you have in your pipeline. Because the more informed they are, the better position they can be to help you understand what things could be patentable or could be spun out. And I think there's a lot of fear or, there's many unknowns about how to take that technology and transform it into a business. And that's where groups like Startup Health with their Alzheimer's disease moonshot can be really helpful resources, because they understand the nuance of how to build a business in the health sector. And so they can really provide valuable resources for folks at the early stage to understand what's required, what the key steps are, and to really help drive that innovation forward. So a few key partners, definitely worth engaging.
So let's bring on Emily. Come back and join us and share in this conversation, because we're looking at a pipeline and the use of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think for, those of us at the Women's Brain Health Initiative, we are driven by, so we represent the basic science. So where some of these early ideas are being seeded. But you can't make ideas if you don't have the data. So there's a whole bunch of missing data out there about health experiences that are specific to women. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is build the largest and most comprehensive collection of brain imaging data ever acquired for women's brain health. How do we do that? Not to sound too tongue-in-cheek, but we want to rewrite the rules of how science is done. So traditionally, you'll have, it's very siloed science. It's sort of this kind of myth of the lone genius, where you'll have one person collecting some data, making inferences about it, publishing it, and then moving on. But there's so much data that's untapped in those brain imaging data that's acquired around the country. And if we could pool that data and pair it with standardized women's health history data, suddenly you could start to amass data on the orders of tens of thousands of data points, which is something that UK Biobank has been a good model for. There's something called Human Connectome Project, which has also done this. What's striking to me is that none of these big data initiatives for neuroscience have been done with women's health in mind. That's an oversight. It's also an opportunity. That's where we can come together. We can pool unprecedented amounts of data, whether it's traditional big N big data or what we call small N big data, which means deeply phenotyping individuals from both biofluids and brain, linking them together, deploying AI models that can make sense of that data in a way that traditional statistics really fail. And I'll give one example. So the Women's Brain Health Initiative has a AI core. This is co-led by Nina Milan and Amy Kusieski. And we're generating data to track women across pregnancy so that we can understand how the brain unfolds. It's never been done. It's 2024, and just last month, we published the first brain imaging study to track how the brain is changing, which is it's infuriating, but also like, think about how much potential we have to understand conditions like perinatal depression. That doesn't just manifest in the postpartum period. You can see signatures of that arise, whether it's from brain signatures or in the biofluids. So what Nina is creating is an AI digital twin of the maternal brain. So you can think of digital twins. Here's the analogy that Nina sometimes gives. Imagine if you are preparing to buy your first house and you go to a loan officer and you run the models to say, what would it be like if I took out a 30-year at this percent or a 15-year? You can run those models and figure out what makes the most financial sense for your family. Healthcare doesn't have that. We can't run models. If you go to your doctor and you say, I'm suffering from this symptom, and they give you a drug, you just take the drug without running the model to see how your unique physiology is going to react to that. The power of digital twins is essentially creating those models for human health. And we can do that with these brain health metrics. And so we're doing that with the maternal brain to understand who might be at risk of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy, who might be at risk of postpartum depression, because we have the first FDA-approved treatment for postpartum depression, but we need early intervention. And so we need to know who is most at risk. And that's where the brain imaging data is really going to become, paired with AI, is really going to become valuable.
Carolee is monitoring what's going on online. And I do want to ask you, Emily, while Carolee is joining us, tell me, how do you take advantage of clinical trials where in the Alzheimer's space, they claim women are 50% of participants? It's just the data is not disaggregated, so we understand the sex-based differences. Do you interface with pharma?
So the WBHI doesn't directly interface with pharma yet. We're really kind of basic science. And I want to make one more ploy to basic science, just kind of given the conversation right now kind of in the atmosphere. Basic science drives discovery. And so when we think about the utility of collecting these sorts of data, like why would we care about understanding how the brain changes across pregnancy? Well, a lot of people jump to the clinical implications. So we can understand who's at risk of postpartum depression. We can understand why a hypertensive disorder in pregnancy might increase a woman's risk of vascular dementia, even if it doesn't manifest for 30 years. Those are really compelling cases. And the same that Carolee talked about, of the 6.7 million women living with dementia, or people living with the dementia, 2/3 are women. We should understand that. But I also don't want to lose the magic of just the basic biology. Like, and going back to this maternal brain example, if you crack open a neuroscience textbook, even from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, you would read that the human brain was basically fully developed right around puberty. That hormones come online during puberty, they shape the brain. You see this protracted decline in gray matter, this influx of white matter, and that period of adolescence is really important for driving the brain function, and then it's done. And then it's just kind of like the slow march to decline after that. But what we've shown with this maternal brain project is that could not be further from the truth. The human brain has the capacity for extended neuroplasticity and cortical refinement in its second, third, fourth decade of life, during pregnancy, when hormones can rush online and shape the brain in this incredibly powerful way, right? Neuroplasticity is not over in adolescence. can we harness that basic science fact for conditions in which you might want to generate some neuroplasticity, whether that's a traumatic brain injury or a concussion. So I think there's all these nuggets of gold, all this wisdom that's lying just under the surface of our knowledge because we've never taken women's health or women's unique physiology seriously. So what do we have to learn that can drive innovation? I think it ultimately means taking our bodies seriously for the first time in human history.
All right, let's bring on Carolee.
Yeah,
weigh in on what you're hearing. Yeah.
Well, you touched on a little bit, and Emily touched on a little bit, the fact that 50% of women and 50% of men are involved in clinical trials, but you mentioned, Meryl, that often the data is not disaggregated. But there is a question that has been asked as to whether those trials say anything about men and women with statistical significance.
Who would like to take that one? Sharon, come join us.
Sure. I mean, it's my understanding, and I think that this is being refined with more kind of post hoc secondary analysis, but, you know, from the initial publication, it really looks like what's driving the significant result is in men. Once it's broken down according to sex, you know, females are on the other side of kind of what's considered significant, and it's very clear visually, albeit not very much discussed in the paper, or I don't know how much that has been translated into practice, and how many males versus females have received these various immunotherapies. But, you know, I understand it's a starting point, and we need to start, you know, figuring out who is the best population and when is the best time, and people are steadfast working on those questions as well.
Yeah. I think there are many ways for us to answer that, but I'm not sure that any one of them will satisfy exactly what was asked. I'm sorry.
I'll just jump in to say that obviously we have to have reporting standards within clinical trials. So we have to disaggregate data by sex. So with lecanemab, you have a clinical efficacy of about 40% in men, 12% in women. That wasn't initially reported from the jump. It has to be. So that's just a basic thing that legislators can require of reporting by sex. You know, I think one thing that everybody on this call is familiar with, but maybe not in the audience, is, you know, really kind of making sure people understand where some of those sex biases come from. And that's from the earliest stages of preclinical research, where even to this day, we're still seeing this sex bias where most of the animals used in preclinical research continue to be males. That was something that Annelies Beery and Irv Zucker first discovered in their foundational report in 2011, which led to the Office of Research on Women's Health and the NIH initiating this whole series of policy changes to drive the inclusion of female animals in basic science research. But if you look, it's still a huge problem. So you're not going to be testing the best treatments at the human clinical trial levels if your pipeline's broken before that.
Yeah, and I'll add that it wasn't until 2016 that female mice were included, which is kind of hard to believe. There is one other question, which I think is an interesting one, from one of our board members, which the question is it too early to work towards intervention methods to slow down or even prevent Alzheimer's with the hyperspectral retinal images highlighting potential cognitive decline at an earlier stage? And can these retinal images detect changes between races or gender?
Yeah, I'll be happy to take that. I think that's directed my way. Absolutely, yes. So the data that we have captured at ReadySpec begins as young as 40 and goes with, you know, no ceiling in terms of age. One of the things that I'm really proud about in our research program is that we focus very strongly on characterizing the data very well. So we have information on, you know, sex assigned at birth, obviously, but also on race, ethnicity. And because we're talking about eyes, we also have a lot of information about sort of comorbidities or pathologies that may exist. Cataracts are very common, for instance. And so we capture all of this data and we ensure that this is considered in how we characterize the sample when we're doing analyses. In terms of being able to slow down or prevent the disease. So it's essentially a biomarker, a biologic marker. It's not an intervention, but the power that it has is in supporting therapeutic trials. So by using technology like this, especially in folks who are very early or asymptomatic in their presentation, we can make sure that folks are identified efficiently and cost effectively in order to get into trials. It's really hard to find people who have clinically significant levels of pathologies that these drugs are looking to evaluate when they don't have symptomology. So this is a really time and cost efficient way to do that. And our hope is that this can help expedite how long it takes to run these studies and to bring relevant therapeutics to market much more efficiently. And I hope I addressed that, but just to be clear, we do test the technology in all races, ethnicities, et cetera. We, through our work with the Global Alzheimer's Platform, are very focused on capturing very diverse data and ensuring that folks who are traditionally underrepresented in clinical trials are not underrepresented in our trials.
Well, that's terrific.
So WHAM has challenged experts to identify changes in 3 years. No one is willing to wait for 30. So I want to go across and ask each of you, starting with Emily, a 3-year horizon. What's on the drawing board? What can you accomplish in the next 3 years? Immediate actions.
Yeah, I think, what we're really focused on is, with the Women's Brain Health Initiative, with our baseline project, this is, you can think of it like a discovery science incubator to seed thousands of ideas. So once we have this big data consortium that it's lifespan data of MRI paired with women's health history, we can begin to identify some of the questions that are going to warrant future follow-up, right? Sort of a whole experimentally designed study. But we need the kind of big playground of data to first understand what are the relevant questions to ask. So that's cooking. And I think within 3 years, we're going to, especially because of our commitment to making the data completely open. These are de-identified data, so it can be hosted on our Open Neuro platform so that the global imaging community can ask questions. We have our pet questions that we care about that pales in comparison to what we can accomplish together. There's 30,000 human brain imagers on the planet. When they have access to this data, the discovery and the pace of discovery is going to be much faster. That's number one. Oh, yeah.
Can you share the investment required to make that happen?
Yes. So we are grateful to be endowed by Ann S. Bowers, who was a businesswoman. And it took, about $40 million of endowed funds through to the WBHI to build out our headquarters, which is at UCSB, our data coordination core, which is housed at Stanford, and our AI core, which is housed at Cornell University, at Weill Cornell. Women's brain health is arguably 20, 30 years behind where it should be. So if we're going to make huge change, it's going to require some real investment. And that's going to mean partnerships between traditional NIH funding and philanthropic funding. I noticed that there was a comment in the chat about making sure that we're collecting, these are huge enterprises, and we don't want to do siloed science where we're only looking at the brain and forgetting proteomics or multi-omics and pairing them all together as just one example. And that's really kind of what the WBHI is committed for, is understanding that with this platform that we now have, we can leverage experts in all of these different domains to pair the data for the first time. So that's, our commitment.
Sharon, talk to us about the 3 not 30 mantra.
Yeah, so Bright Focus, we've been supporting female scientists throughout their careers. I think a really interesting statistic was brought up in Emily's video at the beginning that, 20% of tenured professors are still tweed elbow patches. So even though, 75% of our grantees, 80% of the conference goers, the majority of our travel awardees, they're all female. So what happens? They're not matriculating in science and moving up for whatever reason that is. And I've done some research on that, and I think fostering these early experiences and making sure that they have a good mentor and positive experiences, and that their institutions are really looking out for them are really important. And at Bright Focus, we're kind of small enough to be able to ensure that that's happening for our grantees. And so I think, we sit in a unique space there. Also, Emily keeps talking about basic science and funding innovative science. So we're not the NIH. We are early, almost pre-seed funders trying to fund these novel ideas. And so I would encourage the WBI to start looking at Bright Focus and see whether or not we can start to, figure out some new funding initiatives. So for us, it's really trying to identify researchers that we would like to come and submit to our programs and make sure that we are focusing on some of the real novel mechanistic insights and interventions and technologies. So we talked a lot about AI, but I'd really like to just bring up technology in general. I mean, we can now make a brain cell from an adult skin cell. We can clear an entire brain and look at connections without having to even section it. We can look at genes in 3D space. We're building Netflix libraries of brain recordings, neuroimages, real world health data, and now we need to put that all together. And so AI is no longer an option. It's absolutely essential to start collating all of these pieces of information together and start making sense of that. Also, amazing technologies. I mean, X chromosome hasn't really been looked at all. So people are starting to include X in GWAS studies. That's great. But we know that the X chromosome, genes are inactivated, but sometimes escape that X inactivation. And so technologies now, you can actually visualize which genes are escaping that X inactivation. So I just see technology really catapulting this field way faster than I ever imagined when I was in graduate school. So it's all very, very hopeful.
What advice do you give to these young academic scientists early on? Are women asking for enough money? Or what aren't we doing that we should be doing?
Actually, it's really interesting. So while the number of awards throughout our programs, at least in Alzheimer's disease, because vision is kind of a different beast, vision is way behind on looking at sex-based differences. They're way behind in bringing female researchers to the forefront. So in Alzheimer's disease, the award number is relatively the same, but what's really interesting when I break it down according to award value, females are consistently receiving 3% less than males across the board in their awards. So we're planning on digging deeper into that. I think that there are a lot of times when I have females come to me and they say, I'm frustrated, I can't get this grant. I'm going to put my male PI as the head PI and I'm going to be the co-PI. And I always talk them out of it and make sure that they're the ones that are the head PI. They're the early career investigator. They're the one that needs to move their career forward. And so we're always here. We have 3 PhDs here. We're all females. We've all experienced academia and maybe have wanted to run far away from academia, but we understand the nuances and really try to help the researchers navigate, some of the pitfalls and hardships that females especially encounter.
Emily, can you talk to us about the concern about the gender bias built into AI? It's only as good as what's out there already. How do we accelerate the knowledge that you're gathering so it is included in the models that are being run?
Yeah, that's the ultimate point, is that AI models are it's garbage in, garbage out, or, hopefully the opposite of that. So this is something that with the directors of the AI core at the WBHI, we're thinking a lot about how to build inclusive AI, obviously across sort of sex and gender, but obviously even way broader than that. The kinds of people who volunteer to participate in research studies is not reflective of the general population. And so we need to do more participatory kind of community-based outreach to bring those people into science and to make sure science is serving society, not just one wedge of society, but the whole pie, if you will. So yeah, I think it has to behoove, all of, especially people who are doing these big data initiatives, to make sure that they're getting kind of population-based participants, so that AI models can be trained appropriately and make predictions that are serving everybody equally.
And Catherine brought up the point about the lab to market pipeline. Are you connected with tech transfer across your institutions?
Was that directed to me? Sorry, can you repeat that question? I was just reading.
Well, Catherine had talked about the tech transfer, that researchers don't often see the commercial potential.
Yeah,
I
think there would be, I think more dialogue between Catherine's side of the table and my side of the table is always welcome, because sometimes us basic science nerds have our sort of blinders on, and we don't necessarily see the commercial potential or relevance. And so I think, having more dialogue around that is always welcome. That is starting to happen, but it would be welcome to have more pathways between the two worlds.
Meryl, there's one question that I think might be interesting. I realize this might not have come up yet in research, but I'd be curious, as is this other person who's asking it. Can you speak more about the Alzheimer's menopause link and what approaches women can take to prevent or certainly push off and not think about Alzheimer's for a long time, if ever, apart from HRT, which is what most of people are prescribed to be on. Any thoughts on that? Any comments?
Sharon, would you like to take that?
I mean, I unfortunately don't really have an answer for that. I think the jury is still kind of out. I think early on research studies showing that hormone replacement therapy could cause other downstream cancers and cardiovascular effects has largely kept research away from investigating hormone replacement therapy, which really leaves us in a spot where, people who are going through perimenopause are asking, should I take this? And the jury's still out. And so it's a real disservice to have not determined when and how and where to take these, replacements, or, again, I don't think that menopause has even been listed as a topic for NIH funding until the last year. So it's finally given a topic and we can finally track the funding. But I feel like just a lot of women are in the dark, not sure how to best protect our brain as we go through these drastic changes.
Well, that's the bizarre part of this, right? Is that, we're talking about 52% of the population and we're just kind of coming out of the dark, and menopause is clearly having a moment, which is fantastic. And I think will receive the kind of funding, and it appears to be, that's needed to really give women lots of different options. There's one last question that I think I'd like to ask, which is, I'd love to hear your thoughts around if there's a possibility in how we can bring together various pieces of the puzzle, such as WBHI's maternal health imaging database and, say, MERV's RNA mapping platform for pregnant women. There's all this amazing data being gathered in multiple places. How do we marry these together to drive a holistic sense of understanding? I think that kind of collaboration is really going to make the difference. Any thoughts on that from any of our panelists?
Emily?
I think that's exactly it, is that, again, if I sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but we have, the whole history of science has been built around this model of single investigators living in their silos. And I think that's a dead end. I think that in order to make real progress, this has to come together. We have to do deeply collaborative work, both in terms of big data and deep phenotyping, which means marrying the latest advancements in brain imaging technology with the latest advancements in multi-omics. And that requires a very science-first, ego-last mentality that has traditionally not always been how science is done. And I think that, as more women get into positions of power, you're starting to see a huge change in just creating a revolution in neuroscience and changing the very act of how science is done by putting ego aside, coming to the table with all of our unique expertise. I'll just leave you with one thing. If, we're thinking about kind of small investments, I think there could be a real power. I know Doris Duke does this, other foundations, but hosting think tanks, hosting even a 2 to 3 day workshop where you can get the world's leaders in multi-omics deep phenotyping profile, like, Mike Snyder at Stanford, paired with the people who are doing brain imaging, paired with reproductive endocrinologists and immunologists, like having them come together and design what would be the moonshot project right? And then designing that and carrying it forward, as opposed to each of us just sort of chipping away. We have to change that model, and I'm super excited to see it starting to happen.
And I completely concur with that, Emily. And it is something WHAM likes to do, intends to do, and has become pretty successful at doing, and that is to create collaboration. And to that extent, as you probably all know, we have a WHAM research collaborative that has brought together the women that you see here on this screen, as well as 97 others, close to 100 who are the leaders in women's health research in given areas, for them to be able to tap into each other's expertise. So let me say that as we wrap up with this roundtable, I want to leave you with a powerful question, and that is, why is our campaign 3 Not 30 our call to action? And I want to try to answer it a little bit as well, and say it's because we believe that collectively we have the economic power to create meaningful change. It's women who drive economies. It's in the US, we make up more than 50% of the workforce and the population, and we influence 85% of consumer spending. And we are the chief medical officers of our families, making 80% of the healthcare decisions. So the numbers, don't just tell the story, they necessitate action, which is what is happening. So I think together we all have the ability to take the insights and the opportunities that we've discussed today and turn them into tangible results, such as have been suggested. So I know we're all going to create changes that we set forth so that women and society as a whole flourish in 3 years, not 30. And I have to thank Meryl, Mariana, her team, Lori, our team, and all of our esteemed panelists, just for sharing their enthusiasm, their knowledge, their passion, and their drive to make sure that everything gets done that we're looking for in 3 Not 30. So for more information on WHAM, please visit whamnow.org or follow us on social media. Thank you again for being with us. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you, Meryl. You're a dear friend and a treasure and a knowledge base in everything having to do with the health of healthy brains in women. Greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you at our next dialogue, which will be on December 3rd, where investment leaders will highlight the immense untapped market, opportunities in women's health, a space where economic potential meets transformative societal impact. All of you know that we are now working on our next report, which is focused on how can investment in businesses started by women, or certainly focused on the health of women, create change and impact. And that is an area that we think has tremendous opportunities for us to explore. So thank you. Looking forward to continuing this wonderful work together and to these dialogues with all of you. We appreciate you joining us.